Have you ever been so tired of being judged that you just snapped and told everyone the truth they didn't want to hear? Well, that's exactly what happened to me at my cousin's engagement party. And let me tell you, the silence that followed my revelation was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I'm standing there, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by relatives who had spent the last 5 years treating me like the family disappointment, and I was about to change everything they thought they knew about success, money, and what it means to have a real job. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is that I'm about to take you through one of the most intense, emotional, and ultimately liberating experiences of my entire life. You see, I've been carrying this weight on my shoulders for so long, this burden of being seen as the one who never quite figured it out, the one who was wasting their potential, the one who made the wrong choices. Every family gathering for half a decade had been the same exhausting performance where I'd smile politely while Uncle Richard asked when I was going to get serious about my career, where Aunt Martha would sigh dramatically and tell my mother she was sorry I hadn't turned out more responsible, where my cousins would exchange knowing glances as if to say they were glad they had taken the traditional path. But that night, something inside me just broke. Or maybe it finally healed. I'm still not entirely sure which. What I do know is that the person who walked into that party was different from the person who walked out, and the family dynamics that had been suffocating me for years were about to be completely transformed. I want you to understand something right from the start. This isn't just a story about proving people wrong or getting revenge on judgmental relatives, though I won't lie and say those elements aren't part of it. This is about the deeper pain of not being seen, of not being understood, of having your worth measured by standards that don't even apply to your life anymore. It's about the courage it takes to live authentically when everyone around you is telling you that you're doing it wrong. And it's about that moment when you finally decide that their approval isn't worth more than your own peace of mind. I grew up in a family where success was clearly defined. You went to college, you got a degree in something practical like engineering or medicine or law. You climbed the corporate ladder, you bought a house in the suburbs, you had 2.5 kids and a golden retriever, and you retired with a pension after 40 years of loyal service to the same company. That was the blueprint, the roadmap, the only acceptable path to being considered a functioning adult. My parents had followed it, their parents had followed it, my siblings were following it, and every single one of my cousins was marching along that same well-worn trail, except me. I had veered off the path, and in my family's eyes, I had gotten completely lost in the wilderness. The judgment started subtly at first, little comments here and there, gentle suggestions that maybe I should reconsider my choices, concerned looks when I talked about my work. But over time, as I continued down my unconventional path, and as my relatives became more convinced that I was making a terrible mistake, the criticism grew louder, more direct, more painful. By the time of that engagement party, I had developed thick skin out of necessity. I had learned to deflect, to change the subject, to laugh off the comments that actually cut deep. But thick skin isn't the same as armor, and underneath all those defensive layers, the wounds were accumulating. I was tired, so incredibly tired of defending my choices, of justifying my life, of pretending that their words didn't hurt. And on that particular evening, with the fairy lights twinkling in my cousin's backyard and the sounds of congratulations and celebration filling the air, I was about to reach my breaking point. The thing is, I had been keeping a secret, a big one, and not because I was ashamed, but because I had learned that sometimes silence is easier than confrontation. I had let my family believe what they wanted to believe about my financial situation, my career stability, my future prospects. I had let them assume that I was struggling, barely making ends meet, probably drowning in debt, definitely not contributing to a retirement fund. And the truth, the real truth that I had been holding close to my chest, was so different from their assumptions that I knew revealing it would be like detonating a bomb in the middle of their carefully constructed worldview. But that night, after one too many condescending questions, after one too many pitying looks, after one too many suggestions that maybe it wasn't too late for me to go back to school and get a real education that could lead to a real career, something inside me just said enough. The party was beautiful. I have to give my cousin credit for that. She had always been one of the kinder relatives, one of the few who didn't openly judge my choices, though I suspected she privately agreed with the rest of the family's assessment of my life. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with string lights crisscrossing overhead, elegant table settings, a stunning floral arch where she and her fiancé had posed for photos. There was a jazz band playing softly in the corner, waiters circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and an open bar that several of my uncles were taking full advantage of. Everyone was dressed in their finest, smiling, laughing, celebrating this next chapter in my cousin's life. And me, I was standing near the dessert table, trying to make myself as invisible as possible, when Uncle Richard approached with that familiar expression on his face, the one that said he was about to offer some unwanted life advice disguised as caring concern. I could see him coming from across the lawn, weaving between clusters of relatives, his face already set in that patronizing smile that I had come to dread over the years, and I felt my stomach tighten with anticipation of what was about to unfold. Uncle Richard was a successful attorney, partner at a prestigious firm downtown, and he had made it his personal mission over the years to guide me back onto what he considered the right path. Never mind that I had never asked for his guidance and had made it clear multiple times that I was happy with my choices. But men like Uncle Richard don't let little things like explicit rejection stop them from dispensing their wisdom. And tonight he seemed particularly determined to have what he probably thought of as an important conversation with his wayward niece. He came up beside me, helped himself to a chocolate-covered strawberry from the display I had been mindlessly staring at, and launched right into it without even a proper greeting. "So," he said, drawing out the word in that way that immediately put me on edge, "when are you going to stop playing around and get serious about your future?" I felt that familiar flush of anger and embarrassment heat my cheeks, but I kept my voice even, controlled, as I had trained myself to do over countless similar encounters. "I am serious about my future, Uncle Richard. I work very hard at what I do," I replied, not looking at him, keeping my eyes fixed on the elaborate dessert display as if it was the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. He made a dismissive sound, somewhere between a laugh and a scoff, and I could feel his eyes on me, judging, measuring, finding me lacking. "Come on," he said, and there was actual pity in his voice now, which somehow felt worse than the condescension. "You're what, 28 now? 29? You can't keep doing this internet thing forever. At some point you need stability, benefits, a career path, not just some hobby that makes a little spending money. The internet thing, that's what he called it, as if my entire professional life could be reduced to something so trivial, so inconsequential. I had heard variations of this speech from him and others so many times that I could probably recite it myself, but it never stopped stinging, never stopped making me feel like I had to justify my entire existence to people who had already decided I was wrong. I took a deep breath, counted to 5 in my head, a technique my therapist had taught me for managing moments exactly like this, and prepared to give my standard response, the one where I politely thanked him for his concern, assured him I was doing fine, and then extracted myself from the conversation as quickly as possible. But before I could open my mouth, Aunt Martha appeared on my other side, as if she had been summoned by some invisible signal that her brother was engaged in his favorite activity of trying to fix my life. "Oh, Richard, you're talking to her about the job situation," Aunt Martha said. Not to me, but about me, as if I wasn't standing right there. "Good, good. Maybe if enough of us say something, she'll finally listen. You know her mother is just beside herself with worry. Just beside herself." And just like that, the irritation that had been simmering in my chest burst into full flame, because now they were bringing my mother into this, talking about her worry, her disappointment, as if I was some kind of burden that she had to carry. I looked up then, finally making eye contact with both of them, and I saw my mother across the lawn, engaged in conversation with my aunt's husband, and she looked happy, relaxed, not at all like someone who was beside herself with worry about her daughter's life choices. That's when I realized that Aunt Martha was probably projecting, probably speaking more about her own concerns and judgments than my mother's actual feelings, but it didn't matter because the damage was done, the fuse was lit, and I was about to explode in a way I never had before. "You know what's interesting?" I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, calmer than the storm raging inside me. "You've been asking me about getting a real job for years now, and I've been polite, I've been patient, I've deflected and changed the subject, and let you all believe whatever you wanted to believe about my career. But I think maybe it's time I actually answered your question honestly." Uncle Richard looked slightly taken aback by the shift in my tone, by the fact that for the first time in years I wasn't immediately backing down or retreating, and Aunt Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. But there was also something like satisfaction there, as if she thought I was finally going to admit defeat and ask for help finding a proper job. Have you ever felt that moment right before you do something that you know will change everything? When time seems to slow down, and you're hyper-aware of every detail around you, the sounds, the smells, the expressions on people's faces. That's where I was right then, balanced on the knife's edge between my old life of swallowing my pride and my new life of standing up for myself, and I chose to leap forward into the unknown. "My job," I continued, and I could hear my voice getting stronger, more confident with each word. "The one you keep calling my internet thing. The one you think is just a hobby. The one you're convinced won't lead anywhere. Well, let me tell you what it actually involves and what it actually pays. By this point, a few other relatives had started to drift over, drawn by the unusual intensity in my voice, or perhaps sensing that something significant was happening. And I saw my mother's head turn in my direction, her conversation forgotten as she picked up on the shift in atmosphere, and I knew there was no turning back now. I had started this revelation, and I was going to see it through to the end, no matter how uncomfortable it became. I work as a digital content creator and online entrepreneur, I said, using the official terms instead of the dismissive ones my family had employed for years. And yes, I know that sounds vague and unimpressive to you, so let me get specific. I create educational content across multiple platforms. I've built a following of over 2 million people who value what I have to teach. I've developed several digital products that generate passive income. I consult for major brands on their social media strategies, and I speak at conferences around the world about digital marketing and content creation. Uncle Richard's expression had shifted from patronizing patience to something more uncertain, but I could tell he still wasn't convinced. Still thought I was probably exaggerating or describing something that sounded more impressive than it actually was in terms of real financial success. I could see the doubt on his face, the skepticism, and it fueled me to continue, to push past the point of comfortable revelation into territory I had never intended to enter. You want to know about stability? I pressed on, my words coming faster now, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and liberation. I own my home outright, paid in cash 3 years ago. No mortgage, while most of you are still making payments on 30-year loans. You want to know about benefits? I pay for my own health insurance, my own retirement contributions, and I still have more flexibility and freedom than anyone in a traditional job. You want to know about career growth? My income has increased by an average of 40% year over year for the past 5 years. How many of you can say that about your annual raises? The silence that had fallen over our little group was profound, heavy with shock and disbelief, and I could see my cousin's party continuing around us, oblivious to the drama unfolding near the dessert table, the band still playing, people still laughing, the celebration carrying on while my family's understanding of my life was being completely upended. Aunt Martha recovered first, her face settling into skeptical lines as she crossed her arms over her chest. "That's a lovely story, dear," she said, and her tone suggested she thought I was either lying or grossly exaggerating. But claims are easy to make. Anyone can say they're successful. And that, right there, that dismissive response after I had finally opened up, after I had finally shared the truth I had been protecting for years, that was the moment when I decided to go nuclear, to share the one piece of information I had sworn to myself I would never tell them because it felt too much like bragging, too much like reducing my worth to a number. "You want proof?" I asked, and I pulled out my phone, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Let me show you my tax return from last year. Let me show you exactly what this internet thing that you've all been so worried about actually generates in income." I pulled up the document, the official IRS form that showed my total income for the previous year, and I turned the screen toward Uncle Richard, watching his eyes scan the page, watching his expression change from skepticism to confusion to absolute shock as he processed the numbers he was seeing. "That can't be right," he muttered, reaching out to take the phone from me to look more closely, as if proximity would somehow change the figures displayed on the screen. But it was right. It was absolutely correct. And the number staring back at him from that tax return was higher than his annual salary as a partner in a law firm, significantly higher, and I watched as that realization crashed over him like a wave. Aunt Martha grabbed the phone from his hands, her eyes widening as she saw the same information, and then other relatives were crowding around. My cousins, my mother's siblings, even some family friends who barely knew me, but were now intensely curious about what could have caused such a commotion. The phone was passed from hand to hand, each person's face registering the same progression of emotions, disbelief, shock, confusion, and in some cases, what looked uncomfortably like envy. "I made $387,000 last year," I said out loud, putting the number into words so there could be no misunderstanding, no room for misinterpretation. And that's after expenses. That's net income. And this year, I'm on track to break $500,000. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and I watched as the reality of what I had just revealed rippled through the group, transforming their understanding of me, of my choices, of everything they had believed about my life for the past 5 years. My mother had made her way over by now, her face a mixture of pride and shock and something that looked like hurt, probably because she was realizing that I had kept this information from her too. that I had let her worry unnecessarily, that I had chosen silence over sharing this success with my own family. And I felt a pang of guilt about that, even as I stood my ground. The crowd around me had grown larger, more relatives drawn by the commotion, and I could see my cousin, the one whose engagement we were supposed to be celebrating, watching from across the lawn with an expression I couldn't quite read, and I felt a moment of remorse that I had created this scene at her party, that I had stolen focus from her special day. But then Uncle Richard spoke again, and his voice had lost all its patronizing tone, replaced by something harder, something defensive. "Well," he said, and I could hear him trying to regroup, trying to regain the upper hand in a conversation that had completely gotten away from him. "Money isn't everything. You know, there's something to be said for respectability, for having a position that people understand, for contributing to society in meaningful ways." And just like that, my moment of guilt evaporated, because even when faced with irrefutable proof of my success, even when confronted with evidence that completely contradicted their narrative about my failed life choices, they were still trying to find ways to diminish what I had accomplished, still trying to maintain their position of superiority. "Contributing to society?" I repeated, and I could hear the edge in my voice now, the anger I had been suppressing for years finally finding its outlet. "I teach people skills that help them start their own businesses. I've mentored dozens of young entrepreneurs who have gone on to create their own success. I donate more to charity each year than most people in this family make in salary. So please, Uncle Richard, tell me more about meaningful contributions to society." Have you ever reached a point where years of accumulated resentment just pour out of you, where you can't stop the words even if you wanted to, where you're saying things you've thought 1,000 times but never dared to speak? That's where I was, and I could see some relatives nodding slightly, perhaps remembering their own experiences with Uncle Richard's judgmental attitudes, perhaps recognizing that I was finally saying things that needed to be said. But I could also see others looking uncomfortable, shifting their weight, probably thinking I was being disrespectful, probably believing that even if I was successful, I should still show deference to my elders, should still accept their authority to comment on my life. "And you know what the worst part is?" I continued, my voice rising slightly. "I didn't keep this information from you because I was ashamed. I kept it from you because I knew this would happen. I knew that no matter how successful I became, you would find ways to diminish it, to question it, to suggest that it didn't count because it wasn't the path you approved of." The pain in those words was real, raw, and I saw it register on some faces, saw my mother's eyes fill with tears, saw one of my younger cousins nodding vigorously as if I was speaking truth she had felt but never expressed. I kept quiet because I wanted to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation, because I valued family peace over personal vindication, because I thought maybe if I just kept my head down and stayed humble, eventually you would all see that I was doing fine and the criticism would stop. But it never stopped, did it? Every gathering, every holiday, every phone call, there was always someone questioning my choices, someone suggesting I was wasting my potential, someone treating me like the family disappointment. And I'm done. I'm just done with all of it. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shocked silence. This one was heavier, more thoughtful, filled with the weight of uncomfortable realizations and shifting perspectives. I looked around at the faces surrounding me, at the family members who had been such a constant source of stress and pain, and I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vindication, but a deep sadness that it had come to this, that I had felt so unsafe in my own family that I had hidden my success for years rather than share it with them. My journey to this moment, to this breaking point at my cousin's engagement party, had been long and complicated, filled with doubt and determination in equal measure. And as I stood there in the aftermath of my revelation, I found myself mentally traveling back to the beginning, to the moment when I first decided to step off the traditional path and forge my own way. It started in my final year of college, when I was supposed to be applying for jobs in my field, supposed to be preparing to join the corporate world like all my peers, like everyone in my family expected. I had majored in business administration because it seemed safe, practical, the kind of degree that would lead to stable employment and parental approval. But somewhere during those 4 years, I had discovered something that fascinated me. Far more than anything in my textbooks, I had discovered the world of digital entrepreneurship. It started almost accidentally. I had created a blog to document my college experiences, writing about everything from study tips to navigating difficult roommate situations to finding balance between academics and social life, and somehow, miraculously, people had started reading it. Not just my friends or family obligated to support me, but strangers from around the world who were finding value in what I was sharing, who were commenting and asking questions and telling me how much my posts had helped them. That feeling, that rush of knowing that something I had created was genuinely helping people, was more intoxicating than anything I had ever experienced. And I started spending more time on the blog than on my coursework, staying up late to write posts, learning basic web design, figuring out how to grow my audience. By graduation, I had built a modest but engaged following, and I had started making a little money through ads and affiliate marketing. Nothing substantial, maybe a few $100s a month, but enough to make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I could turn this into something more than just a hobby. My parents had other ideas, of course. They were thrilled when I graduated summa cum laude, proud of my academic achievements, already planning my future in their minds, probably seeing me in a corner office somewhere, climbing the corporate ladder they had always envisioned for me. When I told them I wanted to take a year to focus on growing my online business before committing to a traditional career path, I might as well have told them I wanted to join a circus. The disappointment on their faces was crushing. The concern in their voices was palpable. My father, ever practical, launched into a speech about the importance of building a resume, about how gap years look to potential employers, about the competitive job market and the necessity of striking while the iron was hot. My mother, more emotional in her approach, talked about how worried she was for my future, how uncertain and unstable the internet was as a career path, how she wanted me to have security and benefits and a retirement plan. I listened to them. I understood their concerns. I genuinely appreciated that their worry came from a place of love. But I also knew with absolute certainty that if I didn't at least try to build this thing I had started, if I let fear and other people's expectations push me onto a path I didn't want to be on, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I made a deal with them. Give me 1 year, I said 1 year to really commit to this and see if I can make it work. And if I can't generate a livable income by the end of that year, I'll start applying for traditional jobs, I'll do the corporate thing, I'll follow the path you want me on. They weren't happy about it, but they agreed, probably figuring that 1 year of struggle would be enough to convince me to come to my senses, to accept that my little internet experiment wasn't a viable career option. That year was the hardest of my life, hands down, no competition. I worked 16-hour days consistently, teaching myself everything from SEO to social media marketing to video production to email list building. I lived in a tiny studio apartment that I could barely afford, eating ramen and peanut butter more nights than I care to remember. I had no social life to speak of because every free moment was invested in building my business. There were so many moments during that first year when I wanted to quit, when the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Uncle Richard told me I was being foolish, that I was wasting my education, that I should just accept reality and get a normal job like a responsible adult. And the worst part was watching my college friends start their careers, seeing their Facebook posts about first days at impressive companies, about moving into nice apartments in exciting cities, about having expense accounts and health benefits and clear paths forward. Meanwhile, I was still in my studio apartment, still grinding away at content that sometimes felt like it was disappearing into the void, still struggling to gain traction despite pouring everything I had into this venture. My family's concern during this period was constant and exhausting. Every phone call with my parents included worried questions about how things were going, suggestions that maybe it was time to start sending out resumes as a backup plan, offers to help me find positions at companies where they had connections. Extended family was even worse. At that year's Thanksgiving dinner, which fell about 8 months into my experiment, I had to endure an entire evening of thinly veiled criticism and unwanted advice. Uncle Richard had been particularly brutal that night, making jokes about internet get-rich-quick schemes and suggesting I was too smart to fall for that kind of nonsense. But something happened around month 9. Something clicked. I figured out a content strategy that really resonated with my audience. I launched a digital course that solved a specific problem my followers were facing, and suddenly money started coming in. Not a little bit, but substantial amounts. Enough that I actually had to sit down and make sure I was reading my bank statements correctly. By month 10, I was making more than I would have at an entry-level corporate job. And by month 12, when my deadline with my parents arrived, I was earning enough to not only support myself comfortably, but to actually start saving and investing. I remember the day I sat down with my parents to review the terms of our agreement. I had prepared a whole presentation showing my income statements, my growth metrics, my plans for continued expansion. I was nervous, but also excited, convinced that once they saw the numbers they would understand, they would be proud. They would recognize that I had made the right choice. But their reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of celebration or even relief, there was skepticism, questions about sustainability, concerns about whether this was just a lucky streak that would dry up, suggestions that maybe I should still consider getting a real job as a safety net. That was the first time I felt that specific pain, the pain of achieving something significant and having the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters question whether it was real, whether it would last, whether it was enough. I had met the terms of our agreement, exceeded them actually. But instead of the validation I craved, I got more worry, more doubt, more pressure to conform to their vision of what my life should look like. Looking back now, standing in my cousin's backyard, having just revealed my financial success to my shocked relatives, I could see that moment as the beginning of the pattern that would define my relationship with my family for the next several years. The pattern of me achieving success and them finding reasons to diminish it or question it or suggest it didn't really count. After that first year, I kept my head down and kept working. I expanded into new platforms, diversified my income streams, built multiple successful businesses under the umbrella of my personal brand, and yes, I made good money, more than I had ever imagined when I started. But I stopped sharing details with my family because I learned that no amount of success would be enough to change their fundamental belief that I had made the wrong choice. Have you ever tried to explain your work to someone who has already decided they don't respect it? It's exhausting, soul-crushing in a way that's hard to describe unless you've experienced it. Because no matter what you say, no matter how you frame it, their mind is already made up and they're just waiting for you to finish talking so they can explain why you're wrong. That's what the next few years felt like. A constant battle between living my truth and managing my family's perception of me. And somewhere along the way, I made the decision that it was easier to just let them believe what they wanted to believe, to accept the role of family disappointment if it meant avoiding constant confrontation. I stopped trying to explain the complexity of what I did, stopped correcting people when they referred to my work as my internet thing or my little hobby, stopped defending my choices when the criticism came, and I especially stopped sharing financial information because I had learned that even proof of success wouldn't change their minds. It would just shift the goalposts to some other measure by which they could find me lacking. The isolation of this approach was profound. I was achieving things I was genuinely proud of, milestones I wanted to celebrate, and I had no one in my family to share them with. When I paid off my house at 26, an accomplishment that should have been celebrated, I told no one because I knew the response would be questions about whether it was a wise investment or suggestions that I should have bought something more traditional in a better neighborhood. When I was invited to speak at a major industry conference, an honor that validated years of hard work, I mentioned it casually to my mother, and she asked if they were paying me to be there or if this was one of those things where you had to pay for the privilege, completely missing the significance of the invitation. When my income crossed the six-figure mark for the first time, I was alone in my home office, staring at my accounting software, wishing desperately that I had someone to call who would understand what a big deal this was, someone who would be purely happy for me without qualification or concern. I found that support eventually, not from family, but from my community online, from fellow entrepreneurs who understood the journey, from mentors who had walked similar paths, from friends I made in my industry who celebrated my wins because they knew how hard won they were. I built a chosen family of sorts. People who saw me clearly, who valued what I was creating, who never once asked me when I was going to get a real job, and they sustained me through the lonely years when my biological family couldn't or wouldn't see me for who I really was. But there's something about family, about blood connections, about the people who knew you before you became who you are, that makes their opinion matter in a way that's hard to shake even when you know intellectually that they're wrong. Even when you've built a whole support system that validates your choices, there's still that small voice that wonders if maybe they're right, maybe you are making a mistake. Maybe traditional success is the only real success, and everything else is just pretending. I battled that voice constantly, especially in moments of struggle or uncertainty. When a business venture didn't work out the way I planned, or when income dipped for a quarter, or when I felt overwhelmed by the constant hustle required to maintain multiple revenue streams, that's when the doubt would creep in. That's when I would wonder if maybe I should have just taken the safe path, gotten the corporate job, made everyone happy, even if it made me miserable. But then I would remember why I started this journey in the first place. I would remember the feeling of creating something from nothing, of helping people through my content, of having autonomy over my time and my choices, of building wealth on my own terms rather than trading hours for dollars in a job that would never quite fulfill me. And I would push through the doubt, recommit to my path, and keep moving forward. The family gatherings during these years were performances, carefully choreographed dances where I tried to be present without being too visible, where I answered questions about my work vaguely enough to avoid lengthy explanations, but specifically enough to not seem evasive, where I deflected criticism with humor and changed subjects when conversations got uncomfortable. I became an expert at emotional management, at protecting myself while maintaining the appearance of family harmony, at swallowing hurt and presenting a calm face. But the cost of this constant performance was high, higher than I acknowledged even to myself for a long time. I developed anxiety around family events, would feel my stomach tighten in the days leading up to holidays and celebrations, would have to give myself pep talks in the car before walking into my parents' house, would decompress for days afterward from the stress of maintaining my careful facade. My therapist, who I started seeing around year 3 of this pattern, helped me understand that I was experiencing a form of chronic invalidation, that having your reality constantly questioned and dismissed by people who are supposed to love and support you creates a specific kind of psychological stress that can be as damaging as more overt forms of emotional abuse. She encouraged me to set boundaries, to be more direct about what I would and wouldn't tolerate in conversations, to consider sharing more about my success so that my family could update their outdated perception of my situation. But I resisted. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself, that my family's comfort with their narrative about me mattered more than my own need to be seen accurately. This is what I was thinking about as I stood at that engagement party, watching my revelation ripple through the crowd of relatives, seeing their faces as they struggled to integrate this new information with their long-held beliefs about my life. Understanding that I had reached the end of my ability to maintain the performance, the facade had finally cracked, and there was no putting it back together. My mother reached me then, pushing through the crowd, her face wet with tears, and she pulled me aside, away from the curious onlookers and the whispered conversations that had broken out around us, and for a moment we just stood there, mother and daughter, with years of unspoken tension hanging between us. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, and her voice was small, hurt, confused in a way that made my heart ache. "Why did you let me worry when you were doing so well?" And I had to be honest with her. I had to tell her the truth that I had been avoiding for years, because every time I tried to share good news, it was met with skepticism or concern or suggestions that it wouldn't last, because I got tired of defending my success to people who had already decided it wasn't real, because it hurt. Less to let you believe I was struggling than to keep fighting to make you see that I was actually thriving. The pain on her face at those words was sharp, immediate, and I knew I had wounded her. But these were wounds that came from truth, from finally being honest about the damage that years of judgment had done, and sometimes healing requires acknowledging the hurt before you can move past it. She tried to defend herself and the family, tried to explain that the concern came from love, that they only wanted what was best for me, that they couldn't have known how well I was doing if I never told them. And I understood all of that. I did. But I also knew that the responsibility for our broken communication didn't lie solely with me, that I had tried in the beginning to share, and had learned quickly that sharing led to more pain than silence. We stood there in that moment of raw honesty, both of us crying now, both of us hurt in different ways, both of us trying to figure out how we had ended up here, how the love we had for each other had gotten so tangled up in judgment and defense and miscommunication that it had taken a dramatic public confrontation to finally address it. Around us, the party continued, though I could feel the shift in energy, could sense that our family drama had become the main entertainment of the evening, could see relatives clustering in groups, undoubtedly discussing what had just happened, probably taking sides or offering opinions about who was right and who was wrong in this situation. My cousin, whose celebration this was supposed to be, finally made her way over to me, and I started to apologize for creating a scene at her party, for stealing focus from her special day. But she stopped me with a hand on my arm and a small smile. "I'm glad you finally said something," she told me quietly. "I've watched them do this to you for years, and it always bothered me. But I never knew what to say. I didn't know it was this bad, though. I didn't know you were keeping that much from everyone." We hugged then, a brief moment of solidarity. And I felt grateful that at least one person in the family understood. At least one person saw the situation clearly. And then she went back to her fiancé and her celebration, leaving me to deal with the aftermath of my revelation. Uncle Richard approached me again, but this time his energy was different, less patronizing, more uncertain, as if he wasn't quite sure how to interact with me now that the power dynamic had shifted. "Look," he started, and then paused, seeming to struggle with words, which was unusual for a man who made his living through eloquent arguments. "I may have been too quick to judge your choices. I didn't understand the full picture, and while I still think there's value in traditional career paths, I can see that you've found something that works for you." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was as close as I was going to get from Uncle Richard, and I appreciated the effort even if the execution was imperfect. I nodded, accepted his olive branch, and we moved past each other. The years of tension between us not resolved, but at least acknowledged. The rest of the evening was surreal. Relatives who had barely spoken to me at previous gatherings suddenly wanted to have long conversations, to ask detailed questions about my work, to understand how I had built my businesses. Some were genuinely curious, eager to learn, perhaps seeing opportunity where they had previously seen only risk. Others seemed motivated by something less pure, by envy, or by the desire to find some flaw in my success that would allow them to maintain their previous judgment. I answered questions patiently, shared what I was comfortable sharing, but I also set boundaries, made it clear that I wasn't going to become the family's free business consultant or the person they turned to for financial advice after years of dismissing my professional expertise. Have you ever noticed how success changes the way people treat you? How accomplishments that were previously minimized suddenly become impressive when there's a dollar amount attached? It's a strange, somewhat disappointing phenomenon that reveals a lot about what we value as a society and how we measure worth. As the evening wore on and the shock faded, I started to feel the exhaustion, the emotional toll of the confrontation, the weight of finally saying things I had held in for so long. I found a quiet corner of the yard and sat down, just needing a moment to process everything that had happened, to understand what this meant for my relationship with my family moving forward, to figure out who I was now that the secret was out. My younger cousin, Jessica, who was in college and who I had always felt a special connection to, came and sat beside me. She had been watching everything unfold, had heard my revelation, and now she looked at me with something like awe and something like relief. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've been thinking about starting my own business, something in graphic design, but my parents have been pushing me toward accounting, telling me I need something stable, something guaranteed. Watching you stand up to everyone tonight, hearing what you've accomplished, it made me feel like maybe it's okay to want something different. Maybe success doesn't look the same for everyone." And that, right there, that moment made everything worth it, made the confrontation and the discomfort and the tears worthwhile. Because if my honesty helped even one person feel empowered to follow their own path, to resist the pressure to conform to other people's expectations, then the cost of speaking up had been worth paying. We talked for a long time, Jessica and I. I shared more details about my journey, gave her advice about starting a business while still in school, warned her about the challenges she would face, the doubt, the fear, the criticism. But I also told her about the rewards, the freedom, the satisfaction, the joy of building something that's entirely yours. She left our conversation energized, determined, already planning her first steps, and I watched her go back to the party with a smile on my face, thinking that maybe this confrontation, as messy and painful as it had been, might actually lead to something positive, might open up new possibilities for connection with family members who previously felt distant. My father found me in my corner. He hadn't said anything during the initial confrontation, had stood at the edge of the crowd watching with an expression I couldn't read, and I honestly had no idea what he was thinking or how he felt about what had transpired. He sat down beside me, was quiet for a long moment, and then he started talking, not about the money or the business or the confrontation, but about his own life, his own choices, his own moments of doubt about the path he had taken. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I've worked at the same company for 32 years. It's been stable, it's been secure. I've been able to provide for our family, and I'm grateful for all of that. But there have been days, more than I'd like to admit, where I've wondered what my life would have looked like if I had taken some risks, if I had pursued something I was passionate about instead of something that was practical. I've never told you this, but when I was young, before I met your mother, I wanted to start a restaurant. I loved cooking, loved the idea of creating a space where people could gather and enjoy good food, but my father told me it was too risky, that most restaurants fail, that I needed to be responsible and get a degree and find a stable job. So that's what I did, and I've built a good life. But sometimes I wonder. The vulnerability in his words, the admission of his own regrets, shifted something in our relationship, created a new space for understanding between us, and I realized that some of his pressure on me to follow a traditional path came from his own unexplored dreams, his own road not taken. "I'm proud of you," he said finally, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm proud that you had the courage to do what I didn't, to take the risk, to build something of your own. And I'm sorry that my concern came across as criticism. I thought I was protecting you from failure, but I can see now that I was projecting my own fears onto your choices." We sat together in silence after that, father and daughter, understanding each other in a new way, healing something that had been broken without either of us fully realizing it was damaged, And when we finally stood up and rejoined the party, something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, some difficult, some surprisingly pleasant. And by the time I left that party, exhausted but strangely lighter than I had felt in years, I knew that my relationship with my family would never be quite the same, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe the honesty, as painful as it had been to arrive at, would ultimately lead to something healthier, something more authentic. In the days and weeks following the party, I had individual conversations with various family members. Some apologized for their past judgments, some tried to justify their concerns, some admitted they were impressed by what I had built, and some remained skeptical, unwilling to fully let go of their belief that traditional paths are superior. But even with those who didn't change their minds, the dynamic was different because now they had to reckon with concrete evidence of my success, with numbers they couldn't dismiss or explain away. My mother and I had several long talks, working through the hurt and misunderstanding that had built up over the years. She apologized for not taking my work seriously, for not asking better questions, for allowing her worry to manifest as criticism, and I apologized for shutting her out, for keeping my success a secret, for assuming she couldn't be supportive when maybe I hadn't given her enough chance to try. Our relationship didn't heal overnight. These things take time. But we were moving in the right direction, building a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that had been missing before. Uncle Richard and I reached an understanding of sorts. We would never be particularly close. Our personalities and values were too different for that. But he stopped with the condescending career advice, and I stopped bristling with defensive anger every time I saw him. We could coexist peacefully at family events, which was honestly all I needed from him. The most significant change was in how I felt about myself within the family context. For years, I had carried this weight of being the disappointment, the one who made the wrong choices, the cautionary tale about what happens when you deviate from the approved path. But after the engagement party, after finally standing up for myself and revealing my success, that weight lifted. I no longer felt I had to prove anything to anyone, no longer felt I had to earn my place at the family table. I realized that I had been giving my family too much power over my sense of self-worth, had been allowing their opinions to define my value, when the truth was that my worth was inherent, existed independently of their approval or understanding. This realization was liberating, transformative even, because it meant I could engage with my family from a place of strength rather than defense, could share my life with them without needing validation, could accept their love without requiring them to understand every aspect of my choices. I also started being more open about my work with family members who were genuinely interested, gave real answers when people asked what I did instead of vague deflections, shared my struggles and victories more authentically, and found that some relatives, particularly the younger generation, were truly curious and supportive once they understood what I was actually doing. Jessica, my younger cousin, became something of a mentee. I helped her start her graphic design business while she was still in college, guided her through the early challenges, celebrated her first client, her first profitable month, her first year in business, and watching her succeed on her own terms gave me a deep sense of satisfaction, a feeling that maybe the pain of my journey could help smooth the path for others. I also started being more intentional about setting boundaries with family members who couldn't seem to move past their judgment. I didn't need to cut anyone off or create drama, but I could politely but firmly shut down conversations that veered into criticism of my choices. I could choose not to attend every family event if I wasn't in the emotional space to handle potential negativity. I could prioritize my own mental health and well-being over maintaining the appearance of perfect family. Harmony. This was revolutionary for me, someone who had spent years prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own, who had swallowed hurt rather than cause conflict, who had shrunk myself to make others feel bigger, learning to take up space, to assert my needs, to expect respect rather than constantly earning it, felt like stepping into a new version of myself, and I liked this version better. She was stronger, more confident, more at peace with who she was and what she had accomplished. Looking back now, from the perspective of time and distance, I can see that the confrontation at the engagement party, as dramatic and uncomfortable as it was, needed to happen. I had reached a breaking point where the cost of silence exceeded the cost of speaking up, where protecting the status quo was doing more damage than disrupting it. And sometimes that's what it takes to create change, a moment when you just can't keep going the way you've been going, when you have to choose between your authentic self and your performed self, when you have to decide whether other people's comfort is worth your own diminishment. The experience taught me several important lessons that have continued to shape my life and my relationships. First, that honesty, even painful honesty, is usually better than comfortable lies. The years I spent hiding my success to avoid confrontation created distance and misunderstanding that ultimately hurt more than the truth would have. Second, that you can't control other people's perceptions or reactions, but you can control your own actions and boundaries. I spent so much energy trying to manage my family's opinions, trying to avoid judgment, trying to make them understand, when the real work was accepting that I might never have their full approval and learning to be okay with that. Third, that success means different things to different people, and that's perfectly fine. My family's definition of success, rooted in traditional career paths and conventional markers of achievement, wasn't wrong. It just wasn't mine, and both can coexist without one negating the other. Fourth, that vulnerability and authenticity are scary but necessary for real connection. By keeping my truth hidden, I prevented my family from really knowing me, from understanding my life, from celebrating my achievements. The walls I built to protect myself also kept out the possibility of genuine intimacy and support. Fifth, that speaking up for yourself isn't selfish or disrespectful, it's necessary. I had internalized the message that maintaining family harmony was my responsibility, that voicing my hurt or frustration was causing problems rather than addressing problems that already existed. But the truth is that real harmony comes from honest communication, not from one person swallowing all their pain to make everyone else comfortable. And finally, that you have to be willing to risk the relationship as it is to have any chance at the relationship it could be. I was so afraid that confronting my family would destroy our bonds that I maintained a superficial peace for years, but that superficial peace was actually slowly eroding our connections. It was only by risking the uncomfortable confrontation that we created space for something more authentic to emerge. I want to emphasize, because this is important, that I don't regret choosing an unconventional path. Despite the years of family judgment and despite the loneliness of not being understood by the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters, I would make the same choice again. The freedom, fulfillment, and financial success I've found through entrepreneurship has been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every family gathering where I felt like an outsider. My only regret is that I kept silent for so long, that I let fear of judgment keep me from being fully honest about my life, that I prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own truth. If I could go back and do it differently, I would be honest from the beginning. I would share my wins and my struggles. I would set boundaries earlier. I would require respect rather than hoping for it. I would trust that the people who truly love me would find a way to support me even if they didn't fully understand my choices. But I can't go back. I can only move forward with the wisdom gained from those difficult years. And that's what I'm doing. Living more authentically. Communicating more. Openly, demanding more respect, accepting less judgment. The financial success, while significant and worth mentioning because it validated my choices in a way my family could understand, was never really the point. The point was having the courage to define success for myself, to build a life that aligned with my values and passions, to create something from nothing through hard work and determination, to help others through my content and example, to live with integrity and authenticity. Even when it was difficult, the money is wonderful. It provides security and freedom and the ability to be generous with causes I care about, but the real victory was staying true to myself despite constant pressure to conform. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely misunderstood by the people who know you best? Have you ever achieved something you were proud of, only to have it dismissed or minimized by people whose opinion matters to you? Have you ever hidden parts of yourself to keep the peace, only to realize that the peace you're maintaining isn't real because it's built on not being fully seen? If any of this resonates with you, I want you to know that you're not alone, that choosing an unconventional path is hard enough without the added weight of judgment from people you love, that it's okay to set boundaries with family, that you don't owe anyone justification for your choices if those choices are making you happy and hurting no one. I also want you to understand something crucial. Your worth is not determined by other people's ability to understand your choices. You are not obligated to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You are allowed to be proud of your accomplishments even if they don't fit conventional molds, and you deserve respect and support from the people in your life. Full stop. Not conditional on meeting their expectations, not dependent on following their preferred path, but simply because you're a human being worthy of love and acceptance. The journey to this understanding has been long and sometimes painful, but I'm grateful for every step, because it led me to this place of knowing who I am, what I value, and what I will and won't accept in my relationships. I'm grateful for the confrontation at the engagement party because it forced conversations that needed to happen, because it cleared the air in ways that years of polite avoidance never could, because it gave my family the information they needed to update their understanding of my life, and because it gave me the experience of standing up for myself in the most challenging context possible. I'm grateful for the family members who made efforts to understand, who apologize for past judgments, who have made genuine attempts to support me in the years since that party, and I've made peace with the ones who haven't changed, who still view my choices with skepticism, who still think I'd be better off with a traditional career, because I've learned that I don't need everyone's approval to be successful or happy or worthy. Their inability to see my value doesn't diminish that value, it only reveals their own limitations and biases. And I'm especially grateful for the community I've built outside my family, for the fellow entrepreneurs and content creators who understand the unique challenges of this path, for the mentors who have guided me, for the audience who has supported my work, for the friends who celebrate my wins and support me through challenges, for Jessica and others in my family who have let my example give them courage to pursue their own unconventional dreams. These relationships, built on mutual understanding and respect, have sustained me when family support was lacking, and they remind me that sometimes the family you choose is just as important as the family you're born into. My business continues to grow. I've diversified even further, launched new ventures, taken on exciting projects, and yes, continued to increase my income year after year. But the external success feels less important now than the internal peace I've found, the confidence to be fully myself regardless of context, the freedom from constantly seeking validation from people who were never going to give it, the joy of authentic relationships built on honesty rather than performance. These are the real markers of success in my life now, and they matter more than any dollar amount or business milestone. So here's my call to action for you. If you're hiding your success to avoid judgment, consider what that silence is costing you in terms of authentic connection and support. If you're on an unconventional path and struggling with criticism from family or friends, know that their inability to understand doesn't mean you're wrong. It might just mean they're viewing your choices through a lens that doesn't apply to your life. If you're thinking about taking a risk, starting a business, pursuing a dream that doesn't fit the traditional mold, and you're held back by fear of what others will think, remember that other people's opinions about your life matter far less than your own happiness and fulfillment. And if you're struggling with the kind of chronic invalidation I experienced, where people you love constantly question your choices and diminish your accomplishments, please know that it's okay to set boundaries, to demand respect, to choose your own well-being over maintaining false harmony. I encourage you to comment below and share your own experiences. Have you dealt with family judgment about your career choices? Have you ever had to stand up to loved ones who didn't understand your path? What helped you find the courage to be authentic even when it was difficult? I want to hear your stories, your struggles, your victories, because sharing our experiences helps us all feel less alone in our challenges, and your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to find their own courage. If this story touched you, if it resonated with your own experiences, if it gave you something to think about, or helped you feel seen in your own struggles, please leave a like on this video. It helps more people find this content, helps the YouTube algorithm understand that these real, raw, emotional stories matter to viewers, and honestly, it just encourages me to keep sharing honestly about my experiences, even when it's vulnerable to do so. And if you want more stories like this, more honest conversations about navigating family relationships, building unconventional careers, finding the courage to live authentically, and dealing with the challenges that come with choosing your own path, please subscribe to Living Through It. This channel is dedicated to sharing real human experiences, to creating a community where people can be honest about their struggles and celebrations, where you don't have to pretend everything is perfect, where authenticity is valued over polish, and where every story reminds us that we're not alone in our messy, complicated, beautiful lives. Make sure to click that notification bell so you don't miss future videos, because I have so many more stories to share, so many more conversations to start, so many more truths to explore together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community where we can all live through our experiences together and come out stronger on the other side. Remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's understanding. Your success doesn't have to look like anyone else's, and you deserve to be seen, celebrated, and supported exactly as you are.